Good evening all, and welcome to the second week of the June content extravaganza. Tonight I have some chilling haunted wood stories for you to enjoy. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened a few years ago when I was 13. Every summer since I was 7, I'd go up for this sleepaway camp up in the Canadian Shield, around the Georgian Bay area for 2 weeks. There I would spend a week and a half on the island, then 3 days on an out trip, which was basically just canoeing to 2 different campsites in the bay and actually camping on those sites with tents and stuff instead of sleeping in cabins. I should also mention that the lake and islands that the camp were built on were originally waterways the Aboriginal people used when canoeing to get from place to place, and then also a big place for trading when the colonizers came. Thus, there was a startling amount of shipwrecks and ghost stories in the area. There's one in particular that I'm bringing up in the actual story, because I feel like it's important. So a few summers back, I went up to this camp like normal. I got to the top bunk in the cabin, met my cabin mates and my counselors. The out trip would be the following morning. Because of scheduling, and thus after getting up at 7 a.m, we set out at 8. We took 3 canoes, with the counselors sterning 2 and more confident campers sterning the 3rd. I wasn't sterning, as I suck at it. We paddled for 4 to 5 hours down the channels, and it was all fairly normal, right until we reached the first campsite. The first campsite was on a bare, rock-covered point, and setting up the tents and splitting off into groups for said tents was fairly easy. The counselors had their own tents, and were also setting up the camping stoves because they didn't trust us with them. After that was finished, we went swimming. This is where the first weird thing happened. I bought goggles, and because no one else did, they all wanted to have a go using them to look underwater. Arjun practically begged to use them, so I handed them over and started hunting crayfish near the dock. 5 minutes later, Arjun shot up out the water, gasping, his eyes wild. He scrambled onto the rocks, yelling that someone else, had been swimming underneath him. No one saw anything, and Marcus even took the goggles and checked, but there was nothing. We teased Arjun for freaking out. He sulked in his tent for the rest of the evening. Claire said the lake messes with your head, and that it reflects sound weirdly, and that light even refracts strangely. That night it rained hard. When we got up, our sealed food barrels had been tampered with. They were bear and raccoon-proof, locked with metal rings, and still food was missing. Some had been dragged into the lake. Daniela's backpack was in the water too. She had to swim for it. Some of her clothes were just gone. Nobody confessed to leaving those lids loose. We all just blamed the storm and moved on. We paddled deeper into the bay. The rain was endless. At one point we heard this odd scraping beneath our canoe. It was faint, like nails dragging across the bottom, but I chalked it up to rocks. Or maybe I imagined it. I was soaked, sore and tired. We couldn't reach the second site by water. It was up a steep, forested ridge, so we had to portage. As we carried gear along a muddy path, Claire stopped and pointed across the lake to a crumbling white statue on the opposite shore. It was a Virgin Mary figure, half submerged, chipped from decades of storms. "Have you ever heard the story of the Mary statue?" she asked. We hadn't. And she goes on to tell the story. Years ago, a woman brought her son and daughter out here to camp. One afternoon she went to gather firewood, and when she came back, both her children had drowned. No noise, no warning, just gone. She built the statue for them, and a few days later she walked into the lake and never came out. We were all quiet after that. Every one of us turned to look at the water. We reached camp by evening, set up our tents and tried to shake the story off. But as Daniela washed the dishes near the lake, she suddenly screamed. We turned and saw her flailing in the shallow water, one leg stuck under the surface. She was crying and panicking, yelling, "It's grabbing me, it's got my ankle." Brooklyn and Kaya rushed in and pulled her out. She kept sobbing, saying it was human, that something with fingers had closed around her leg. We didn't laugh this time. Not after what Arjun saw. Not after the food barrels and not after the statue. That night, I slept in the tent closest to the water with Arjun and Daniela. I remember how damp and heavy the air felt. The tent walls were sticky with condensation, and the smell of wet nylon made it hard to breathe. I've always had trouble staying asleep, and sometime after midnight I woke up, and that's when I heard it. A voice coming from the lake. It was impossible. Soft but clear like music, like someone I loved, even though I didn't recognize it. "Leela," it whispered, "come into the water. You love to swim. Come, we're waiting." It sounded female, but it was low and velvety like honey and smoke and sunlight all wrapped together. It was the most beautiful voice I'd ever heard. I wanted I needed to go to it, to step into the lake and never come out. I sat up, hand on the tent zipper, but I didn't open it. Why? Because I was too tired. I'd paddled for hours in the rain, barely eaten, and just didn't have the energy to move. I lay back down, closed my eyes, and let exhaustion drag me under. I think about it a lot, how close I came. If I'd been just a little less tired, I think I would have gone and walked right into the black water and never been seen again. I never told the others. It felt too strange. I was too scared. Like speaking about it would make it real or make it return. I don't know what it was. Maybe the spirit of the mother from the story, or maybe something else that has been living here by the lake and in the trees, waiting for the lonely, grieving, and the curious. But sometimes, late at night, in my mind I can still hear the whisper, "Come swim." And part of me still wants to know what was calling for me. This might sound a bit far-fetched, and honestly I wouldn't blame you if you didn't believe me, but I swear it's true. I'm mostly just putting it out there because it's been sitting on my chest for a while, and it's one of the freakiest nights of my life. I live in a small neighborhood in Georgia, kind of a quiet tucked away spot where everyone knows each other. Out behind our neighborhood there's this long, narrow dirt road. It's not paved, it's not marked, and pretty much everyone around here agrees it's creepy as hell. There's only one house near the start of it, an old, slanted place with a rusted mailbox and a chicken coop in the yard. After that, the road stretches deep into the woods, and when I say deep, I mean the kind of backwoods that starts to feel wrong the longer you're in it. Now my friend Jack told us this story one night that got under his skin. He said a few weeks prior he was walking down that same dirt road near dusk, when out of nowhere he heard gunfire. Not just a pop-pop here there, it was rapid fire like bam bam bam, over and over, multiple rifles or automatic weapons going off at once. He said it echoed all the way down from the road, far deeper than where one house was. Now we're not stupid. We know there's hunting that happens out in these woods. It's rural Georgia. But this didn't sound like hunting. Jack said it was too fast, too chaotic, like someone was unloading clips, not taking careful shots at deer. Perhaps it was nothing though, right? But of course, being a dumb bunch of teenagers with more curiosity than sense, me and Jack and two other friends decided we had to check it out for ourselves. So one night, we piled into my buddy's golf cart and headed down that dirt road. It was pitch black, and the only light we had was from the golf cart's weak little headlights. This one street light near the house was long dead, so everything beyond it was just shadows. That road seemed to swallow us. The trees hung low and close on either side, and every now and then we'd hear twigs snap or leaves rustle in the dark. Just enough noise to keep your nerves on edge. We didn't even make it that far down the road, maybe a few 100 yards, when we heard something big. Movement, crunching leaves, something huge. We slowed down and looked ahead, and then we saw it. It was really tall, really pale, white or greyish, hard to tell exactly with the headlights flickering, but definitely humanoid, not an animal. It was just there, moving slowly between the trees on the side of the road, like it wasn't in any rush, but like it knew we were watching. We froze. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. No one said anything, no one had to. We slammed the golf cart into reverse, spun around as fast as we could, and floored it back towards the neighborhood. On our way out, we heard this creepy, screechy yelp near the front of the house off to the side where the chicken coop is. We want to believe it was one of the chickens making this noise, probably scared by our headlights or something. But in that moment, it didn't sound like a chicken. It sounded like something trying to make the sound they think a chicken should make. We didn't speak the whole ride back, just sat in silence, all four of us staring out the window like we expected something to leap out of the trees to grab us. It wasn't until maybe 10 minutes after we got home that anyone said a word, and even then none of us could explain what we saw. It wasn't a person, it wasn't a deer, it wasn't anything we could name. A few days later we went back, this time in daylight. We didn't go far, just enough to satisfy our curiosity and maybe prove ourselves that it was just our imagination playing tricks. But here's the thing, that house near the entrance, there's a gate beside it. One we hadn't paid much attention to because it was partly buried in the brush, but now it was clearer, and there was a sign, yellow and rusted, but you could still read it. Government restricted area. No trespassing. We just stood there staring at it for a long time. None of us said what we were thinking, but I think we all knew. Whatever was out there that night, whatever Jack heard and whatever we saw, we weren't supposed to know about. And we haven't gone back since. I live in a rural area with my elderly grandfather, as I am his primary caretaker. We have very few neighbors, no sidewalks. A small town. We have very few break-ins or rarely any crime in general. A lot of wooded areas and farmland. My house is surrounded by woods and has a tree line separating us from any of our neighbors. I have extensive firearm training and have also worked as a firearm instructor in the past. Last Friday, I'm sitting in my basement on my couch about to go to sleep. This was a pretty regular occurrence. My couch sits in front of a big window, the blinds always closed, and the glass door that leads outside covered with a semi-transparent shade. You can see through it, but just barely, enough to make out silhouettes. It was almost 11 p.m. and I was watching a movie with headphones on, when I thought I heard a noise outside, which is weird, considering I was wearing headphones with the volume up pretty high. So I took off the headphones to listen more closely, and I heard what sounded like footsteps in the gravel driveway just outside my door, but not walking, more like dancing or sprinting, like they were moving very fast. At the time I got up and looked out the glass door and saw nothing, so I chalked it up to it being an animal or something. I sat back down on the couch and was just about to put my headphones back on when I heard 3 distinct taps on my window, just opposite my couch. Naturally, I'm startled, because no one I know is going to do that. They would call me or just knock on my door, especially this late at night. As I stand up again, I hear the gravel in the driveway rustling again, this time louder, and as if someone is running away. The direction I heard them running is directly into a briar patch and densely wooded area. So I grab my rifle that I keep in the closet just beside the basement door and step outside. Using the flashlight attached to the rifle, I scan the tree line looking for possible threats, because I'm convinced at this point some people are here to rob me. I see nothing and go back inside, thinking probably more trying to convince myself, maybe it could have been an animal of some sort. At this point I turn off all the lights inside and stand just behind the glass door with the shade, with the outside floodlight on. This way I could see outside and no one could see in, just watching, making sure everything is okay before I go to bed. It's extremely quiet outside, like in scary stories, when they say even the bugs and birds are silent. That was what was happening. Not a cricket or locust, not anything that was making a sound. As I'm almost ready to give up and say it was just my imagination, I see a flicker of light in the woods in front of me. If I had to guess, maybe the size of a dime, like a reflection of my house lights into metal or something, followed by the bushes rustling. So once again, I step outside and yell, "Hey!" seeing if I could scare who or whatever it was away. But I hear a loud whisper. That's the best way I can describe it. It was a whisper, but loud enough for me to hear from 100 feet away say, "Hey!" back to me. At this point, I'm freaked out. I know it's another person, so I shoulder my rifle, point the mounted flashlight back into the woods again and yell to them, "Wrong house. Get off my property unless you want to perish tonight." At that moment to my right, I hear a person whistle softly. It sounded like they were mimicking a bird. 2 soft whistles, coming from the same tree line, just further to the right. At that point, I turn and aim my rifle about 20 feet short, and to the left of the tree line, not in the exact direction of the noise, in case it was just some dumb kids pulling a prank or something, and fire 5 shots into the ground to scare whoever it was away. I kept the flashlight pointed at the tree line, scanning for any movement. My neighbor's dog started barking. I assume at the gunshots, but I never saw any movement. Anyone scattering. I never heard footsteps running away, nothing at all. So I walked down to the right side where the whistle came from, and continued to look through the woods looking for any sign of people, but I still never saw anyone. As I'm walking back up to my house, wondering what the hell just happened, my grandfather of 84 meets me at the door asking me what occurred. He is still of sound mind, not so much physically, but I explained to him, loaded his revolver, and set it by his bedside in case someone tried to break in during the night. We sleep on opposite ends of the house and on separate floors, so I thought it was the safest option. After I get him back to bed, I go to the upstairs kitchen and grab a bottle of water from the fridge. As I close the refrigerator door, I hear footsteps on the roof of our 2-story house. The low point of our roof would require a ladder to access. I mean, an Olympic high jumper wouldn't be able to make that leap. My whole body is covered in chills. The hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Utter fear is the best way to explain it. My grandfather, being almost deaf, of course didn't hear it, and I'm sure he was already back asleep. I froze listening. The footsteps were heavy, grown man-sized, walking slowly from his room to the kitchen area where I'm at. There's a skylight on the roof of the kitchen. I remain still and look up towards it, praying like hell nothing would be looking back at me. I waited a few minutes and the footsteps continued. Back and forth, from one side of the house to the other. I decided to run back down. Quickly I grabbed my rifle and ran outside, not knowing at this point who or what I'm even dealing with, just relying on my training to be able to neutralize the threat if need be. I try to calm myself, focusing on controlling my breath as I go to the front yard and begin to scan the roof with my weapons-mounted flashlight. But I see nothing. I walk around the house, scanning the trees and roof for any sign of anyone or anything. Again, I saw nothing. I repeated this twice, yelling out a few times, "I don't know who you are, but you better get the hell out of here." Eventually I gave up, returning inside to watch TV, rifle in hand all night. And that was the end of it. No weird or unnatural occurrences since that night. Needless to say, the last few nights have been rough, with little to no sleep. I'm still unsure what exactly happened. I've never had hallucinations before, and I'm not sure even hallucinations could be that real. I told some family and friends what happened, and they all kind of brushed it off. They said I could have imagined the footsteps, or the whistle could have been a bird, and that it might have been a kid playing a prank. But me? I'm not so sure. All this has left me wondering a few things. Am I crazy? Did I hallucinate all of it? If I did, why did the hallucinations only last for one night? Could it have been an extremely well-executed prank? Sure, I guess. Although I'm not sure who would do that, and not have jumped out with a camera after or gone boo announcing it was a prank. Where's the fun in just doing it? The whistling could have been a bird noise, maybe. I'm not a bird expert, but the loud whispering, the hay, the distinct loud footsteps on the roof after, I don't think birds can speak or growl or be 200 pounds. Anyway, that's my story. It's the first possible cryptid encounter I've ever had. I have experienced some weird, unexplainable things in the past, but I'm a skeptic at best as far as paranormal stuff. But that encounter definitely freaked me out, and has had me questioning things now. When I was a kid, I used to spend my summers in New Brunswick with my mum's side of the family. They're Mi'kmaq, and they live on a reservation not far from the coast. I was the white cousin, pale, city-raised, never quite fitting in, but always trying. Every August, my parents would drop me off and I'd stay for a few weeks running around barefoot with my cousins, catching frogs, playing hide-and-seek in the woods, and learning just enough of the language to get teased for saying things wrong. I loved it. It felt like I was stepping into a completely different world. And there was one place none of us were supposed to go, deep in the forest behind my aunt's house, where the tree trunks grew so close you could barely walk through it without brushing against bark. That's what the elders called the burial grounds. You could only reach it by following a narrow deer trail that eventually opened into a low, mossy clearing where the earth rose in strange little mounds. They told me those mounds were the homes of the little people, spirit guardians. They weren't evil exactly, but they were mischievous, ancient and territorial, and didn't like being disturbed. I wish I could remember the word my family used for it. It was long and musical, but I've since forgotten. I only remember how serious the adults were when they spoke of them. No joke or laughter, just full-out respect. Of course, my cousins thought it would be hilarious to dare the white kid to go into the burial ground alone. I should have said no. I knew I shouldn't go. But something deep in my chest screamed at me not to. But I was young, maybe 9 or 10, and desperate to feel accepted. So I agreed and followed them into the woods. They waited until we were around halfway to the clearing before they hung back and told me I had to finish the rest alone. I still remember how the air changed as I stepped off the trail and into the burial ground. It was August, hot and humid, not a single breeze, but inside that clearing it felt colder and denser. The cicadas stopped humming. I don't even think I felt a single mosquito. I remember thinking of that scene in Snow White, when she's running through the forest and the trees seem alive, reaching for her. That's exactly how it felt. I was only in there for a few minutes, at least that's what it seemed like. I walked between the mounds, careful not to step on any, and whispered a small apology, even though I didn't know who or what I was speaking to. And then something shifted. The light was suddenly wrong. It had been afternoon when I went in, bright golden sunlight, and now the sky above the trees was bruised and dim, like twilight, and I realized with a jolt of panic that I had no idea where I was. The path I came in on was gone. I turned in slow circles, calling for my cousins, but my voice felt muffled, like I was shouting underwater. I wasn't crying, but I wanted to. I felt watched and followed, not by an animal, but something else. Eventually I stumbled my way out. I don't remember how. I just remember bursting into my aunt's backyard, shaking, and seeing my cousins sitting on the porch looking pale and stunned. I hadn't been gone for 5 minutes. I had been gone for over an hour. We never told the adults. I didn't want to be a snitch and the cousins were too scared to explain what they'd done. But that night something weird happened. We were sitting around the kitchen table eating dinner. The windows were all open, and like I said, it was hot and sticky. And then suddenly, the window right next to me just slammed open. The dream catcher hanging above it began to spin violently, whipping around in circles like caught in a hurricane. Every other window was still. It was just that one. The room was dead quiet. Everyone stared at the dream catcher. No one said a word. After that, things followed me. When I went back to the city, I started sleepwalking. I had the same nightmares every night for months. Something whispering from the woods calling me back. My parents didn't know what to do. I wouldn't eat. I'd wake up standing at the front door not knowing how I got there. And every summer after that, my family on the reservation gave me a new dream catcher to take home. They never explained why. I remember overhearing my aunt and some of the elders talking in low voices about me. Words like taken and called and protection. But they never let me be a part of the conversations. Eventually the nightmares faded, but the feeling never left. Now as an adult, I won't go near any woods that feel off, not even a little. Last year I was hiking with my kids, and someone pointed out a so-called fairy circle on the trail. They laughed. I didn't. I turned around and took my kids back to the car, because I know better now. I know that when something in the forest calls you by name, you don't answer. I'm from Europe, southern Germany to be exact. This happened to me just 2 years ago in one of the quaintest, most picturesque corners of the country, nestled against the base of the Alps. It's the kind of place where the line between wilderness and village blurs. I live near one of these forests, and working remotely has given me the luxury of taking lunch breaks outdoors. It became a bit of a routine. Shut my laptop, grab a sandwich, and wander into the woods for an hour. It felt like a daily reset for my brain, like I was slipping into another world for a little while. One where the noises of work, life, and stress couldn't reach me. But something else could. That spring we'd had a brutal storm, one of the worst in years. It ripped through our region like a fury, snapping power lines, damaging homes, and leaving the forest devastated. Whole sections of trees were torn apart. Old decaying trunks that had stood for decades just gave up and toppled. Some of these fallen trees were enormous, twisted, exposed roots as big as cars. Their collapse created a strange new clearing, and pathways almost like the forest had been reshaped overnight. And strangely, those fallen trees became a kind of impromptu playground. People climbed on them, sat along their trunks like benches. Kids used them as balance beams. I did too sometimes. There was one I particularly liked, a moss-covered pine that had cracked halfway up and folded gently into a slope, perfect to sit on and watch the sun set through the thinning canopy. And that's exactly what I was doing when it happened. It was late afternoon, early golden hour. The sun had dipped just enough to bathe the forest in warm amber light. The air was still and quiet. I remember thinking how perfect this was, how peaceful. Birds chirping, the scent of pine needles, and there being nothing but calm. And then I heard it, a high-pitched shriek, short, sharp, and utterly wrong. It sliced through the stillness like a knife. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely animal either. Not like a bird or a deer or a fox I'd heard before. And I've lived around these woods my whole life. It sounded mangled, like something trying to mimic a human scream, but just off enough to make your skin crawl, like someone was imitating fear without knowing what it meant. I froze, my entire body tense. Something inside me had suddenly screamed to get up and leave now. I leapt down from the tree, heart racing, and began walking fast. Only because I was afraid of making too much noise did I not run. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I felt like if I did, I'd see something I wasn't supposed to see. Something I wouldn't be able to forget. The dread was instant and overwhelming, and I can't explain why. The shriek was just the trigger. But the feeling, that feeling was the real terror. It wasn't a sound of pain or danger. It was a sound meant to lure. And I couldn't shake the impression that whatever made it had seen me first. Back home, I did what anyone else would do. I googled it. every variation of forest scream, German wood shriek, animal sounds near the owl. The closest match I found was a fox. Apparently foxes can scream like a distorted woman crying. There are even recordings online, and I sure played them and listened to them over and over. But it wasn't the same. The fox screams are eerie, but there is something wild and panicked about them. What I heard that day was cold, deliberate, and the more I tried to convince myself it had been a fox, the more the pit in my stomach said no. That was something else. I avoided the woods for over a week. When I finally went back, something had changed. All the fallen trees had been cleared, probably by the forestry service, but even though the trucks were gone, the forest still bore the wounds, broken branches and deep grooves in the soil. I walked that forest many times since, and it was still beautiful and quiet. But I haven't climbed on another fallen tree since, and I'm grateful to have not have heard that scream again. It was my mother's birthday, and she wanted to celebrate in a big way. Our extended family owns a rural property near a famous volcano outside of Mexico City, Popocatépetl. If you've heard of it, it's been wrapped in stories and myths for hundreds, if not thousands of years. That night, the house was full of laughter, music, family, and friends. Everyone was drinking, eating, and enjoying the warm mountain air. It must have been around 10 when my mum gathered a group of us and announced she wanted to do a little something spooky to end the night. Let's go into the woods and tell scary stories. Now this wasn't a surprise. She's always loved ghost stories and legends. I was raised on them, so I immediately said yes, and followed the group as we left the house behind and walked into the dark. It was a cool night with no moon, and the forest was thick with shadow. We used our phones for lights, but mostly walked by memory, as this was familiar territory. After about 15 minutes of walking and weaving through the woods, we stopped at this strange little clearing on a slope, kind of like a natural terrace in the land. There were 2 dirt paths, one above where we stood, and another one maybe 2 or 3 feet below. There was only one light, a lonely street lamp at the bottom of the path, casting a dull orange glow. We all gathered near the edge of the trail, and I stood up, facing the group, ready to share my story. They had their backs to the woods behind me, and I was looking down the slope towards the lower trail and the light, and that's when I saw something move. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow shifting in the wrong place, but then it stepped fully into view, into the spill of the lamp's glow. I froze and my mouth went dry, and I said, "There's something down there." Everyone turned and we all saw it. It was maybe a meter tall, small but unmistakably there. It walked upright on 2 legs like a human would, but its body was horribly out of proportion. Most of its mass, easily 80%, was in its legs. They were shaped like a goat's hind legs, sinewy and angled, ending in sharp little hooves that clicked faintly against the dirt. Its torso was bizarrely short, almost like an afterthought. Its arms, if you could call them that, were tiny, useless-looking things that stuck to its sides, like T-Rex arms. And its head was goat-shaped but wrong. The snout was too small, the features had a human quality, intelligent eyes, a strange awareness in the way it scanned us. 2 short, twisting horns curling back from its skull, and its mouth was slightly open as it breathed, almost panting. It looked at us, then it turned slowly and began to walk away down the path. But every few steps it would pause and glance back over its shoulder, if it had one, like it was curious, like it was studying us. That's when the dog appeared. Out of nowhere, this huge street dog, a stray that must have been living wild, burst out of the underbrush, snarling, and lunged at the creature, barking furiously. The thing jumped, startled, and turned and sprinted into the woods faster than I would have imagined. The dog gave chase and both vanished into the dark. No one said a word, not at first. Then my mum said quietly, "Okay, maybe let's go back to the house now." We walked in silence. Back inside with lights on and doors locked, people started to laugh nervously, pretending it hadn't rattled them as much as it clearly had. but the tension was still in the air. And then someone, maybe my uncle, said, "Let's draw it. Everyone who saw it, draw what you saw." And we did, all separately, not looking at each other's work until everything was done. No one had spoken about what they saw, and as I said, no one looked at anyone else's paper. And every single drawing was the same warped proportions, the same long goat legs, the same tiny arms and stubby torso, the same human goat face with short horns. Some were more detailed than others, but there was no question. We had all seen the same thing. No one could explain it. To this day, we don't know what we saw. It wasn't a costume, and it wasn't a trick, nor was it a hallucination. We just call it El que vimos esa noche, the one we saw that night. I haven't gone back to the forest since, and when I dwell on it, I wonder if the dog hadn't chased it off, what would it have done? I'm not a ranger or a guide or anything like that, but I've been camping all my life, literally 39 years, and my family's been doing it even longer. 3 decades before I was born, same park, same wilderness. It's more than just a place we visit, it's a part of us. It's hard to explain what a connection like that feels like unless you've had it yourself. It's not just about familiarity, it's a kind of recognition. You step into the forest and the forest steps into you. Every tree, every bend in the trail, even the way the light filters through the canopy, you just know. It's like coming home to a place that never changes, even though everything else in life does. I was 10 years old when something changed. That summer, we were out on one of our usual trips. Family was all there, uncles, cousins, my parents. The weather was perfect, clear days, cool nights. We were at our favorite spot, nestled in a valley with trails weaving up through the thick pines and granite outcrops. I loved it there. But on the very first night I had a dream. I was walking down a trail, one I knew well, but this time I stopped at a small bend, just past a certain old tree that always leaned slightly downhill and off to the path, hidden just enough to miss if you weren't looking for it. And there was a cave. It wasn't a nightmare, nothing terrible happened. I just walked up to the cave entrance, stood there, quiet, and woke up. The next night I had the same dream, same trail, same bend, same cave. It kept happening, every single night of that trip. I finally brought it up to my family around the campfire and asked them if they knew anything about a cave like that, and described it in detail. The slope of the hills, the rocks piled at the entrance, even the moss-covered boulder beside it. They all shook their heads. None of them had ever heard of a cave in that area. I let it go, but it kept nagging at me. So towards the end of the trip, I worked up the nerve and went to one of the park rangers and told them the dream, the trail, the spot. He stared at me for a moment, then said, 12 years ago there was a cave there, exactly where you say, right down the bend, the landmarks, all of it. Apparently it had become a problem. Bears started using it, coming too close to the main campground, creating a danger for visitors. So the rangers had it filled in, leveled what they could and sealed the rest, quietly. They didn't want people going off trail and trying to find it again, digging or getting hurt, or attracting wildlife. The thing is, there was no way I could have known about it. I'd never heard anyone mention it before. It wasn't in any pamphlet, guidebook, or park map. I wasn't some precocious kid who'd researched topography. I just dreamed it. And only once I arrived in the park. After that trip I didn't tell anyone, not because I was scared, but because something private the land had chosen to share with me. I didn't want it turned into gossip or campfire talk. I didn't want someone out there digging what the forest had tried to hide. I'm not a superstitious person, and I've never believed in ghosts or fortune tellers or anything like that. But I do believe that something in that mountain communicated with me. Camping in the wilderness is supposed to be a peaceful escape, but sometimes the woods have a way of making you question reality. One night while on a trip with friends, I experienced something I still can't quite explain. 2 separate encounters with what seemed to be my friend, except he swears he never left his tent. Whether it was a prank, a trick of the mind, or something far stranger, I will never know. But it remains the creepiest thing I've ever witnessed while camping. 2 things happened to me that night, both involving the same friend, and both involving my need to go to the bathroom. Around 10 p.m. I needed to go to the bathroom, so I left our site to use the restrooms, which were about a quarter of a mile away. It was pitch dark. As I was walking, I saw one of my friends who was with us emerge from a path leading to an unused campsite and stepped onto the main path. This unused site was a good 50 yards away from our own. My friend has a very noticeable and peculiar gait, so I knew it was him. At multiple points he turned around and asked, "Why are you following me?" He was always around 40 feet ahead of me, and I replied, "I literally told you guys I was going to the bathroom," and then questioned, "Why did you come from a different site?" He picks up his pace and eventually I lost him in the darkness. I got to the restrooms without seeing him again, did my business and returned to our site, where, of course, he was. I started asking why they were messing with me, but everyone denied that my friend had even left the campsite. Alright, so they're screwing around, no big deal. Then at 3 a.m., I woke up needing to pee. This time I didn't need to walk to the restrooms, I'd just go into the woods a bit. As I was walking back, I heard the distinct sound of a tent zipper opening. In the darkness, I could tell it was my friend. I could barely see him, but I definitely heard him zip the tent back up. As I got closer to the tents, I could see him more clearly. He took a few steps, then went to light a cigarette. I saw his face in the flint strikes of the lighter, even clearer when it finally caught. He lit his cigarette, took a puff and said, "Can you hear me?" "Yeah, I can hear you, what's up?" "Can you hear me?" "Yeah, why are you trying to wake everyone?" He kind of shook his head at me, then turned and walked towards the car, around 30 feet away. Thinking I was being messed with again, I followed him. I lost sight of him behind the car, turned the corner and he was gone. Now I was pissed. He thought he was so funny. So I went back to his tent and it was still closed, and I could hear him faintly snoring inside. I have no idea what I saw, but it looked, sounded, and walked just like my friend. I was slightly inebriated, but not enough to hallucinate. He denies ever leaving his tent or going through the woods ahead of me. I have no explanation for what happened. This happened a couple of years ago, March 24th, 2022. I was 16 and had just gotten my license. My friend's family was going on a day trip to the beach, Pacific City, Oregon, and a few of our friends decided since I just got my license and a new car, we should load up in my old 300ZX, take the T-tops off, and go for a nice trip to the coast. All was going well, other than the discomfort of 4 guys crammed into a small coupe on a 2-hour drive. We eventually made it to the coast and had a good day. After we had packed up our things and started to head home, my friend suggested we take a road he knew, Nestuka Access Road for anyone familiar with the Tillamook Forest back home instead of the main highway. It would take an extra 45 to 60 minutes, but he said it was pretty and would be a nice change in scenery, so I obliged. The sun was setting, and in the thick forest it got dark quick, and before we knew it there was no cell service, no houses, and absolutely no cars, which is quite typical for the mountain ranges between the Oregon coast and the Portland metro area, so it wasn't anything I was worrying about. After about 10 more miles I saw a green SUV hauling a 5th wheel crashed and off the side of the road. Being that no one was around, I decided we should pull over and see if everyone was okay and offered help. It was probably 8 to 10 feet off the road on a slope, only caught by trees that it had hit, and the 5th wheel was absolutely trashed. Both of the side walls were caved in with the contents of the RV spread all along the side of the drop. The SUV was filled with clothes and food wrappers. Almost all the windows were shattered, and there were some pretty significant bloodstains on what was left of the driver door glass, and the windshield didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary for how bad the crash was. There was no one in or near the car, and the truck had stopped by us, and we told him we didn't see anyone, and that we would just be on our way. So he kept driving, and shortly after we started our journey back on the road. We had to go pretty slow as the condition on the road was getting worse and worse, with massive potholes and cracks in the road. It definitely was not intended for lower cars. 3 to 5 miles after the crash site, there was a pretty sharp right-hand turn, with a pullover area on the apex of the turn. As my dim headlights lit up the trees behind the pull-off, I saw what looked like a pale man with saggy skin. From what I could tell, he was naked, but sort of behind some tall grass/shrubs, so I could only see the bottom of its stomach. It had no hair and was kind of scrunched over, like how you would imagine an old man hunched over, just staring at my car. It didn't have prominent features, but the biggest part I remember were its eyes, reflecting my headlights bright like a cat's eyes, and with its whole body turned to keep looking at the car as we drove by. I didn't know what to do or what to think, and my friends in the car were all staring behind us and claimed that it kind of leaned out of the shrubs to watch us drive off. We were all freaked out, and we were discussing what we just saw, whether we thought it was some tweaker that had just crashed his car and just walked off, or if it was some paranormal creature. I kind of played it off as the first option, but the more I thought about it, it seemed like something you'd see in a liminal space or bad AI-generated image. No eyebrows, no hair, pale white saggy skin like when a person loses hundreds of pounds in a small amount of time, except it was saggy on its cheeks and neck and arms, but seemed scrawny and frail. We sped home, and I kinda told people this story when the subject of paranormal experiences came up. About July of 2023, my at the time girlfriend's brother and I were pretty close, so him and his friend and I were driving through the trails of Dixie Mountains, talking ghost stories and such, when I shared this story with them. Her brother's friend said he'd seen the same crash and showed me a picture of the SUV, but he said he didn't see anything creepy. I don't know what I saw or what happened, but it definitely scared me and my friends, and I've never been back on that road since. Maybe someone's seen something similar or had an experience like it in the Oregon wilderness. I hadn't thought about sharing this story until today, when my partner and I were reading a book about cryptozoology and mythological creatures, and it reminded me. I hope you enjoyed, and I'd really like to know if anyone knows what I saw. Every summer, my family and relatives rent a cabin in different parts of Sweden, and it has always been wonderful. But this one time when I was around 12, I saw something that sticks with me all these years later. We rented a cabin in the upper south of Sweden, far away from any neighbors or cities. We were staying up late one night playing cards, and I had just got a laser pen from my grandpa. Around 12 or 1 at night, I went outside to see how far my pen could reach into the forest. I was standing on the grass a few steps away from the cabin, and a few steps away from the tree line. It was a full moon, and I was not at all afraid of feeling creeped out from the dark forest, and just stood there playing with the laser. But suddenly I got a really bad feeling, a mixture of true fear and of being watched. I looked around, but it was just me there, until I saw a white face with a black hollow eye among the trees. Even though the eyes were black holes, I could see it was looking at me as it passed, like it was walking very fast, but its face was turned to me. It had a black, hooded long cape, and black long hair hanging down under the hood. It was really tall, at least 3 meters, and moved inhumanly fast. The silence was so loud, it made no sound when I should have heard branches snapping and leaves rustling while it moved. But nothing. I just froze when I saw it, and didn't know if I actually saw what I saw. But I didn't want to find out if it was real or not, so I just ran back inside and didn't go out at night alone again. I have no idea what I saw, but I have never seen the same thing again. I remember it when I heard a story of someone seeing a pale face with black hair and a lake. I tried drawing it, but it didn't turn out that good, so I don't know if it helps or makes the story any clearer. Has anyone ever had any similar sighting? I'm an 18-year-old female and live by a forest line and the Clinton River in Michigan. So it's not unusual to have wildlife like deer and coyotes running around. I sometimes sit and watch them, but one night around 2 years ago, I'm looking out my window at night, and I see a deer about 50 feet away by the fence line, and I'm just watching it. And it turns to look at me, stands on its hind legs with its shoulders back, and begins swinging its arms while walking towards me. Now I do know deer sometimes will stand on their hind legs, but this was extremely unnatural looking. Its shoulders were completely back, like a human's while swinging its arms. It had a human walk. A year or so goes by, and the auditory thing starts happening. It sounds like a woman speaking over the intercom system, but it's right outside my house, and it's always incomprehensible, but audible, if that makes sense. About once a month. The next encounter happened about a month ago when I was getting ready for work at around 6 a.m. It was dark out, and I was on FaceTime with a girlfriend, and I see a headless deer just standing there by the fence line again. And I flip my camera, and my friend sees it too, which confirms I wasn't just hallucinating. Last night is when things get way too spooky for me. I was coming home from my boyfriend's house, and while I was walking from my car to the door, about 15 feet, I stopped to throw something in the garbage bin, and I looked up to the fence line maybe 40 feet away from me, and see a huge mass with glowing, whitish yellow eyes and ginormous antlers. The thing was about the size of a moose. I stare at it, trying to comprehend what I'm looking at for maybe 10 seconds, and it begins charging at me. It starts running around the other side of the fence to try to get to me, and it's fast. I run to the door and start fumbling with my keys, and it's about 10 feet on the other side of the car by the time I slam and lock the door. I go to my second-story bedroom and try to calm down, and then the intercom lady, as I like to call her, starts talking to me again, and this time I catch it on recording, and made sure other people could hear it too. And I could discern things like, "Come outside," and the rest was incomprehensible as it always is. I couldn't sleep all night, and I didn't know what to do. It's never been aggressive like that before, but it's also never called me outside at the same time as it before. Does anyone have any idea what I'm dealing with, or how I can stop it? A few years ago, just after we moved into our new place in the countryside, something happened that still makes me feel sick when I think about it. I was about 15 then. I'm 21 now, and I can still hear the voice in my head. We had just settled into this old house that sat on a few acres of land, surrounded by woods on two sides. The previous owners used to keep horses, so there was a large, weathered wooden fence that ran around the perimeter of the yard. The pasture was overgrown now, but the fence was still solid. Towards the far end of the property, just inside the tree line, we had a small chicken coop where our hens lived. My chore every night was to feed them and close up the coop. That night was like any other. At least it started that way. It was around 9:30, maybe closer to 10. I remember because I had been doing homework and lost track of time. The sun had been down for a while, and the yard was soaked in that thick kind of darkness you only get out here in the country. I slipped on my boots and stepped outside. The grass was cool and damp with dew, and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle from the woods beyond the fence. The chicken coop sat maybe 150 feet from the house, near the back corner of the yard. I always hated going out there at night. The darkness near the fence felt different too. I always felt like something was watching me from the tree line. I walked out to the coop, crouched down, and started tossing feed into the run. The hens clucked and shuffled over, flapping their wings. And that's when I heard a calm, clear, and unmistakably female voice. It came from just beyond the fence, maybe 10 feet behind me, hidden in the dark brush. "Hey, come here." That was it. Soft, almost casual, but not familiar and not friendly. I froze. Every hair on my body stood up. I turned slowly towards the voice, shining my flashlight into the pitch black beyond the fence, but it barely lit anything past the first few feet of grass. There was nothing there, just darkness. The trees beyond the property swayed gently, but the night was still. The voice hadn't sounded urgent or angry, but there was something deeply wrong with it, like it was trying to mimic calmness but didn't quite know how, like it was pretending to be human. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask who it was or call for help. I just backed up slowly, step by step, never turning around, walking backwards across the yard with my flashlight held in trembling hands. I moved about 15, maybe 20 feet, eyes locked on that patch of darkness at the edge of the fence, before I finally turned and bolted. I sprinted back to the house, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and ran straight to my mom in the living room. And I told her everything. She didn't hesitate. She called for my sister's fiancé Daniel, who was staying with us at the time. He was a Marine, stoic, trained, and someone who was never easily rattled. We grabbed flashlights and went out together, tracing the fence line where I'd heard the voice. There in the bushes, just outside the fence near the coop, exactly where the voice had come from, there was clear evidence that something had been standing there. The grass was flattened, branches were bent and twisted like they'd been gripped or brushed past something large. But there were no footprints, no drag marks, nothing else. Just a space where something had waited silently just outside the light. Daniel did a full sweep but never found anyone or anything. And that was somehow worse. I haven't gone out to the chicken coop at night since. Even 6 years later, I can't bring myself to walk past that part of the yard after sunset. I make sure the porch lights stay on, and sometimes when I'm laying in bed, I think I'll hear movement in the grass, but I won't see what it is. I don't know what that voice belonged to, but I don't want to know. I was working at a summer camp in the Pacific Northwest one year. It was this gorgeous spot, nestled right along the Puget Sound. Tall trees, briny air, wide open grass fields that caught the moonlight just right. A usually peaceful place. On the second or maybe third night, I was jogging back alone from the staff campfire to my cabin. It must have been around 2 a.m. Everyone else had already turned in. The path I took ran through this big, open, grassy corridor, bordered by tall reeds and brush that separated us from the shoreline. The moon was full and bright enough to light my way without a flashlight, and I remember actually thinking how beautiful everything looked, all silver and soft. And that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a person, just someone standing in the reeds, maybe a fellow counselor out for a pee or something. But then it moved. It was crouched down when I first noticed it, almost like it had been hiding. Then in one fast, jerky motion it stood up, took a few clumsy, unnatural steps backwards, and then crouched back down again, disappearing into the reeds but not quite. I could still see it, half concealed but watching. It wore what looked like a long white gown, thin and hanging. Its hair was long and dark, but I couldn't make out a face, just hair, like it was all hair. or maybe the face was turned away, I couldn't tell. But it was the way it moved that convinced me it wasn't human. There was no grace or rhythm, no natural balance. It was like watching a puppet without strings, or an animal pretending to be a person. That's when my knees buckled. I dropped to the ground like someone had cut the strings in my legs. It wasn't just fear, it was total shutdown, and my body refused to cooperate. I tried to scream, nothing, just gasping, this high rasping sound like I was choking on air. I scrambled forward on all fours like a panicked animal, trying to get into the cabin where the campers and my co-counselors were sleeping. It felt like forever. When I finally reached the door, I couldn't even stand to open it. I clawed at the doorknob, fumbling like my fingers didn't know how to work. Eventually the doorway gave and I tumbled inside, slamming it shut, and just stood there shaking and listening. Nothing followed me, no footsteps, no sounds at all. I waited like that for what felt like a long time, frozen in the dark. I couldn't bring myself to check the windows. I didn't want to know if it had followed. At some point, the fear started to slip into this bizarre, giddy hysteria. I remember laughing. I kept saying to myself, it was just a camper. One of the kids was peeing in the reeds, that's all. I laughed for 20 minutes, like someone trying to convince themselves they hadn't lost their mind. Eventually I passed out. But the next morning that explanation didn't hold up. None of the campers had left the cabin during the night. I asked them, all of them, joking at first, trying to play it cool. None of them had gotten up to pee. Not one had heard anything. And I know they weren't lying. These were middle school kids. Someone would have owned up to sneaking out, even just for bragging rights. The camp was specifically for skeptical-minded kids and staff, non-religious, rational thinkers. I still consider myself one. But there's no logical explanation, none I can live with, for whatever I saw in those reeds, because it wasn't human. I have told 3 people this story. 2 of them were involved that night, and one was my therapist. I'm a scientist, and although I'm spiritual and believe in the paranormal, I never really believed in demons or things of that nature. I did grow up in a haunted house, but since moving out have not experienced any paranormal activity, nor have I had any hallucinations. I'm hoping one of you can help me figure out what attacked me. This summer, I wasn't feeling well and was going to go to bed early. While in my pajamas, I saw the local Facebook page had posted about the Northern Lights being out. I had been trying to see them all year and kept missing them, so I grabbed a light jacket and headed out. Of note, I had no drugs or alcohol in my system. I drove north and found some fields to stop in, but the word had gotten out, and every minute another car was passing by, trying to find a dark area to see the lights. After my third spot was wrecked, it takes about another 10 minutes for your eyes to adjust, and every headlight started you back up again. So I drove even farther north. I was on the phone with a buddy of mine as I am a single female alone at night, and he made me feel safer. I hit the highway, and then I saw it. The empty abandoned land that was used by the military for some unknown scientific experiments that had just become public, as, I kid you not, the radiation levels had finally become safe to walk around. I had been there in the daytime and seen some of the old bunkers. Definitely something odd was going on there, but it just so happened to be a mostly open field with no streetlights, making it the perfect spot. I turned down the gravel road and drove about a mile in. I even made the comment to my friend that the place was spooky and these weird birds kept flying around. They looked like bats, but when they landed they didn't stand like bats. I grew up in the country, so the dark doesn't bother me, and I kept going. I finally reached the middle and pulled over to the side of the road. No one and nothing for as far as I could see. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, took a few photos, and then waited for my eyes to adjust. After about 10 minutes, right when my night visions were starting to work, the hair on my neck stood up. I knew this feeling as it usually meant an animal was watching you. Again, I'm a country kid. As I'm on the phone mid-sentence, I turn to my left, and my entire body freezes. It was like the air was moving, a kind of moving shadow. But my mind also knew it was something that walked on 4 legs and stood up, possibly a dog. But again it was translucent. I started screaming, then ran back to my car. I felt that thing hit my back and bounce off, like it tried to go through me but wouldn't. The second it touched me, it felt like a Dementor from the Harry Potter books, but worse. I have never felt such fear and dread. This is worse than death. I don't or didn't believe in hell, so death isn't that scary for me. This made me feel like even in death, I would never feel happiness again. I jumped in my car and sped down the road, still screaming and praying. I kept screaming for my dad and brother, who are both dead, and Jesus, I'm not even Christian, to save me. The worst part is I was driving in the wrong direction. I had to turn around and drive back to get out there. I screamed the entire time for help. At some point my phone call dropped, and my service, which was fine on the way in, finally came back the second I hit the highway. My friend called back asking what was wrong, but I was still crying and screaming. I could barely get the words out what I had seen. I drove all the way back into town and called a friend who lived nearby. I went to her place and stayed there for a few hours to calm down. I didn't know she was religious, and it was lucky she believed in this stuff. I finally got the courage to go home, and she gave me something for protection. I took a shower to warm up, but my back felt cold, like something had cut a thin line across my spine. There weren't any marks I could see, and I had to sit in the shower with my back to the wall because I kept feeling like something was touching me. I lost my voice for 9 days after that, and had to lie to my friends and co-workers as to why. It's been 6 months now, and I haven't had any weird experiences since. Sometimes though, if something touches my back in a certain way, I'll get a jolt of panic out of nowhere. Other than that, I've had no other issues, but I don't talk about it to anyone because 1, I feel crazy, and 2, I don't want to bring attention to it, as I don't even know what to believe in anymore. I think enough time has passed that I want to know if anyone else has experienced this as well. As a scientist, I know our minds can play tricks on us, and I'm fully able to say that maybe the dark tricked my brain, but I can't get over the fear that overcame me after it hit me. I've been scared in the woods at night before. I've camped and been scared something was watching me, but this was far worse, like I could feel it in my soul. Out in the countryside of Texas, my grandparents owned an 8-acre lot, backed up to a heavily wooded area with a creek bed running along the back fence. One summer's eve around my 8th birthday, my entire family had gathered for a cookout. Me and my cousin Max were always running around together, and that day was no different. I decided to head down the creek bed into the woods, as I heard what sounded like a whisper beckoning me to follow deeper. My cousin happily followed behind me as we walked over a fallen fence line. My cousin remembers vividly seeing a woman appear in front of me as I step over the last of the fencing. I continue walking, obviously as my cousin attempted to rush and follow me. However, he remembers the fencing seemingly reaching up and wrapping around his ankle, causing him to fall in mud. He said that I continued walking despite him yelling for me to help him. He took a second to look up at his torn-up ankle with barbed wire wrapped around it. Upon looking at it, he said I was nowhere to be seen, when my older brother came down the creek following his screams, and my cousin claimed my footprints in the creek bed stopped just a few feet beyond the spot Max had seen me last. My entire family is adamant that I was gone for 4 hours. I had police scour the woods and dogs try tracking, but nothing went beyond the last footstep I left in the mud. Upon my return, they were terrified and worried that something had happened, but I didn't have a scratch on me. What I remember of the events after stepping over the fencing is hearing a distant song being sung by someone soft and feminine, the smell of wild berries and sweets, and a feeling of happiness increasing with each step. From my perspective, I found a small clearing and relaxed eating wild berries, playing with some small animals I could say are weird-looking cats, and then stood back up after what felt like a few moments. I looked around and saw movement of what seemed to be dozens of people hiding behind the trees. I looked around slowly, regaining my senses, wondering where my cousin went. I see the path I came down and I started towards it. The environment started feeling more off, like it didn't want me to leave, like it was angry that I was even trying to. The movement of the people behind the trees began to increase, as if they were moving towards my exit to block me. I broke out running and managed to get out of the clearing, jumping over the fence line from before, noticing how dark it seemed now, and rushing up inside the house where I was caught by my grandpa and grilled for answers as to where I'd been, who the woman my cousin saw leading me off, why I didn't stop to help, and what actually happened in the 4 hours I was gone. However, when I told them it felt like mere moments, my grandfather looked more concerned than anyone else. By the time we went back to my grandparents' home for my birthday party, he'd already built up a new fence and fixed the fallen one down the creek. He had even planted some herbs and stuff that quickly took over the fence line, sealing it off with vines and bushes. I've been back to their place once in the last few years. The new owners tore the fence and greenery out, opening the creek again. As I went to drive off, I looked down the creek, seeing a little girl coming back up the property, and a strange woman in a hood standing just beyond where the fence used to be, smiling at me. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed these haunted wood tales. I certainly enjoyed recording them, but I'd love to get your thoughts. Please tune in tomorrow to continue the June content extravaganza with some spooky stories from the cemetery. It's gonna be creepy. I'd appreciate all your thoughts down below, and if you would like to donate a small amount of money to me every month to help keep the channel running, get your name on the end and some exclusive perks, follow the link to Patreon down below. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.